Hey there! Let's listen to the global voices in drones in development. These are a series of masterclasses, interviews, and discussion on the use of drones and drone-based technologies for sustainable development and social impact. So let's get started. Now, this will be a presentation by Walsh from Valqari. As a former Army Ranger with 75th Ranger Regiment, Ryan learned the lessons of working under extreme conditions to accomplish the mission. After leaving the military following several overseas deployments, he turned to entrepreneurship to be a leader in the drone industry. He began working on drone delivery in 2013, filing some of the first ever drone delivery patents in many countries around the world. He has 28 granted patents so far in the drone delivery space, where he is listed as the lead inventor with over 24 more patents pending. He has a degree in economics from Northeastern Illinois University and his MBA is from North Central College. Ryan will be talking about the importance of drone infrastructure. So drones are going to be a critical step in logistics technology, but that only solves half of the problem. The often overlooked part in drone delivery is a supporting system that enables safer and more efficient systems. Drone infrastructure is critical in bridging that gap. Infrastructure that changes the drones, houses the drones, and performs package handling autonomously, that removes the drone-human interaction, makes the process exponentially safer and more effective. So let's get started. Walsh from Valqari.
We're going to be talking about why it's important to incorporate drone infrastructure into the growth of the drone industry. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm the CEO and co-founder at Valqari, and I've been in the drone industry for over 8 years, and we've been working very heavily on solving the problem of the infrastructure requirements, particularly for drone delivery. As I'm sure many of you guys know, drones have really started to be adopted by a number of the large players, not only in the US and Europe, but India is really starting to take very, very quick control of where the industry is going. And drones are really great for getting packages to and from people, but they don't solve a lot of the actual problems associated with using drones in logistics. And so the question always comes up, how do these drones interact with our everyday lives? Right? Where are they going to recharge? Where are they going to drop packages? And what happens if there's an emergency in flight? And so you have to think, if a drone has an issue where the route planning goes wrong, it has a prop fail, it has any number of these items that could go wrong in any aviation circumstance, what happens and where does that drone make an effective emergency landing? And right now, a lot of the choices are you're either off in a field somewhere, you end up on somebody's private property, or you go into a heavily trafficked area, whether by pedestrians or vehicles, and that creates a very unsafe environment for everybody involved. And so how do we deal with that? Right. And that really comes down to the importance of universal infrastructure. That means landing stations, the hangars in which these drones are stored, and the communication and routing networks that allow these drones to provide that, right? If there's multiple drones that are working in different networks, different communication protocols, who do they call and let know I need to reserve this landing area so I can make an emergency landing? And so you look at where the industry is going, and it's going to require a lot of infrastructure, very similar to road or rail travel or air travel now. Cars require all kinds of signage, streetlights, roads, curbs, barriers. And so a lot of those same things are what's going to pop up for the drone industry to ensure safe operations. And that's really where Valqari's products come in. we're working on building a number of different use cases. This one on the left is our drone delivery station, which is a 6-locker system for both sending and receiving. We also have mailboxes that we'll be releasing, window units, large mid-mile shipping containers, and integrated architecture. And I'm going to show you guys a quick example of what that looks like, because it's really important to make sure these drones aren't coming in at ground level and they aren't interacting with humans. You have to think that at any given point, a drone has anywhere from 4 to 8 spinning blades, and that's very just overall not conducive for safety. You know, these are flying robots with spinning blades, and so we need to find ways to remove that human drone interaction, especially in cases like emergencies where the drones you know, need to provide some level of autonomy in finding a safe emergency landing. And so our landing stations predominantly are used for drone deliveries, but it can also act as those recharge points and emergency locations if a drone has some type of problem in air. And that inherently removes that human drone interaction. And so again, going back to the communication, that's something we're also building on the back end. Our back end APIs and app really focus on coordinating all of those efforts for how these drones and landing stations are going to interact. And I always think back to the 19th century, and we saw it with rails. And when trains were first being adopted, especially across Europe, there wasn't really a standard in the beginning. And so you had multiple variables as far as track width and the thickness of the tracks. And so you weren't able to go from country to country or certain areas, province to province or state to state. And what ended up happening was a very costly overhaul where they had to standardize rail transport to the point now where we now have one universal standard that most tracks run on. And it's going to be the same thing with drones. It's going to be a barrier to entry for new parties coming in, for different drone airframes. And if everybody's got to create their own individual standard, it's going to be problematic in the long run for how drones are adopted, especially when you think of, you know, India, for example, where you have multiple overlapping networks, right? You may have one company that's delivering pharmaceuticals and another that's delivering food and another that's delivering documents. And you want to make sure they can all utilize the same communications platforms and the same infrastructure. And so that's really what we're focusing on at Valqari is the safer environment involved by removing that human drone interaction and providing the emergency landing capabilities, the charging capabilities to extend range, and securing the packages themselves. And so it really comes down to how do we this, you know, scaling impact people's way and can be done so cost effectively. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Ryan. That was quick. So are there any questions or comments for Ryan? Ryan, would your solution, I mean, that the ones which you're building for Windows, would they work for package deliveries in housing societies or something like that?
Yeah, we see a lot of situations, you know, even in the US, right? There's different requirements from city to city, let alone when you start looking state to state, whether it's because of weather, building codes, whatever it may be. And that starts getting exponentially different when you start looking at the way construction is done in India or China or Europe, for example. And so that's the reason why we're building a number of different solutions. landing stations, the mailboxes, etc., the window units, each one is to serve those different customers. And so the window one, especially in very dense areas, is going to be really important for package delivery. It is going to require a combination of rooftop landing stations and window landing stations for some of the more urban areas, and then may require some of the ones like over my shoulder for some of the more rural and remote areas. So it's going to require a combination of infrastructure, but it's really important that all that infrastructure runs on the same network, and each one can coordinate with each drone operator.
So somebody's asking you, what is in the box? Is it robotics to move packages to correct locker? What stops the wrong package getting into the wrong person's hand?
So the chain of custody is something we build that's very important. So when you create an order through our APIs, and our APIs can either plug into an app or a POS system or an inventory management system, and it creates a lot of that routing. So if you saw in the video, which I can go back to, when somebody creates an order and goes to send something through the box, only one door opens, and that person only has access to that individual locker, and that's really important for that chain of custody, making sure they can only access the locker that's available to them and not the other 5 lockers. When the drone actually receives the package, it gives us on our back end its individual ID, its serial number. And so we know specifically which drone has that at any point in real time. And then once the drone drops the package off at the receiving station, it transfers those same credentials, that serial number. And so when the recipient goes and grabs that package, they only have access to the locker with their package. So that's how we ensure chain of custody throughout the entire process. And that becomes very, very important when you're talking about pharmaceutical deliveries, when you're talking about, any type of controlled type deliveries. It's extremely important to maintain that chain of custody. So we actually have a dashboard on our back end that you can track where any given specific package is in real time, to make sure that a person only can access the ones that they have the rights to access.
So when you're working in remote areas where the network would be an issue, especially in a country like India, you might have, or in Nepal, where the network itself is very difficult. How do you see these complex systems working for us?
I'm sorry, you broke up a little bit. Do you mind repeating that last part?
Yeah, I'm saying in countries like India and Nepal, where we are, the network is often very difficult. The telecommunication reach is pretty awful. So how do these complex systems work for us? I mean, how can they work for us?
So as long as the drone has some form of connectivity, it will connect with our box. And our box is designed for a number of different solutions. We are testing satellite right now for very remote areas. So the box will have the ability, even in very remote parts of India, to have that connectivity. And as long as the drone is able to maintain connectivity as well for that communication between the landing station and the drone, we won't have an issue. One thing we're experimenting with now is using our box as a form of relay for that communication. And the drone gets close and actually piggyback off of the signal on the landing station, so that communication can happen in real time. So very remote deliveries, obviously that's a lot of where the market is right now. And we're trying to use our infrastructure to solve a lot of those problems. So it's something we're very, very heavily focused on, is making sure that even in the most remote areas, India, for example, that you'll be able to communicate at all times and you won't have those latency issues or those losses in communication.
I see. So there is a question for you. In terms of some specific pharmaceutical deliveries, they have conditions to be met like temperature, heat, etc. How is this ensured once the package is in air and it's delivered till the last point of delivery?
So there's a few factors. Currently, we're partnered with a number of great companies, Bloodstone being one of them, Ergo being another, that have temperature controlled boxes that maintain the temperature, but also monitor the temperature. So at any given point, you can make sure that the package hasn't gone above or below the optimal levels to lose efficacy. One thing that we are building in right now is temperature control. And, you know, it's a rather complex issue. Building it in is what we're finding. But that's something that long-term we're looking to roll out with every box as a standard. So not only is the packaging maintaining temperature, but then our landing stations will maintain temperature long-term as well, both hot and cold. And so, you know, keeping efficacy of these drugs, especially the really expensive ones, you know, that need to go very long distances, vaccines, for instance, it's really important not to lose the potency of it. And so temperature control is something we're putting a lot of effort in our R&D on right now.
And then what kind of partnerships are you looking for? What kind of partners should be interested in getting, you know, your number?
Yeah, we would love to work with anybody who's building networks. You know, our systems are entirely universal. They work for both sending and receiving. We can receive winch packages, hover drops, landed packages. So any drone operator or a user that's implementing drones that's looking for a situation where they need to build infrastructure into their send and receive points, we can very easily do so. It's a very easy integration process. And we plug right into the APIs of that system and we go. So, you know, we're looking to work with anybody doing drone delivery networks and any type of drone delivery operations.
Okay, we have a question. In case of some issues while in the flight, how would the drone be, the box and the drone itself be traced back if it's missing or if it gets dropped? How do we trace it back?
So that would fall a lot more on the drone's flight operator itself. If the drone has an issue in flight, if there's landing stations along that route where the drone has those issues, they can message one of our boxes and use it for an emergency landing, as I alluded to before. You know, but a lot of the times it's more important that the drone operator maintains, you know, active GPS signal and communication with their pilots, so they know if there's an en route problem. Our boxes are always online, so if the drone lands and drops a package in one of our landing stations, we'll always know where it is at any given time. The big issue is always the in-flight. So we want to make sure that at any given point that drone is always speaking to the pilot and giving status updates and location updates.
So we have a hand raised from David. David, would you like to unmute yourself?
Thanks, Dr. Ritchie. Thanks very much, Ryan. Yeah, really interesting. I've got a question, maybe you covered it, I missed it, but we're operating in remote areas, similar to the question before. With connectivity, can they be connected via satellite connectivity, and also can they be solar powered, please?
So solar power is something we are actively working on building into our next generation. Our next generation will have solar power. It will have control and connectivity. We have full connectivity solution. So whether it's a SAT modem, whether it's a 4G, 3G, 5G modem, it plugs right into our landing station and we're able to use whatever is the most optimal. We're even testing with some of our telecom partners right now, different relays. So if one signal ends up not being the strongest, it will immediately switch to a separate signal. So if for whatever reason, you know, LTE goes down, it jumps over to satellite. So connectivity is extremely important to us. Our CTO has an extensive background in connectivity. And so we're ensuring that connectivity is never lost during the process. that's a prime focus for us. We are looking at alternative options such as solar power or different options right now. Where we run into is when you start getting into solar power, it can limit some of the features you add in, such as temperature control, which is very power heavy. There's a huge power drain when you're talking about temperature control, and so solar power isn't always up to the job. So we're looking at what are the optimal solutions for maintaining active power nonstop throughout the entire life of the land station, while still being able to provide those value adds like temperature control and nonstop connectivity.
That's a great answer. Okay, thanks very much. And I assume security is going to be an issue as well if it's in the middle of nowhere.
Security is something we take very, very seriously. There's no way to foolproof every situation. If somebody comes in with, a blowtorch, they're going to get through even the most industrial vaults or safes. And so, we build it for the 99 percentile. The average person will not be able to access this box with basic tools. And even if there is a breach for whatever reason, smart locks that are actually built in each one of those will immediately send a notification that locker has been breached and start triggering our security protocols. And so, there's a perfect world where they can't access it completely, but there is no situation where somebody would access it without everybody being notified in the chain.
Great. Thanks very much, Ryan.
Great. There is a question for you here in the chat which says, does your unit have photo recognition?
Not yet. Cameras are something we're looking to build into our next version, along with temperature control and solar power. A lot of what we focused on for this version of our product is making sure that all of the communication, the drone, all of those basic point A to point B drone requirements are met. And now as we're implementing that and getting different feedback, we're finding what that next level of value add is. And so cameras are one of them, both from a photo recognition as well as a security point of view, along with solar temperature control and a few other features that will be released in the next generation.
What are the challenges that you see, Ryan, evolving over the next couple of years or few years that we should be aware of and prepared for?
The lack of standardization is something we have found to be a big issue. And I mean, that's just the nature of being in an early market, right? There's thousands of different drone airframes with different configurations. And it's our job to be universal and work with all of them. But as new airframes arise and different ways of doing things arise, it's definitely been a challenge. And so, you look at roads, for instance, for cars, and, there's a width of the road lane. There's different signage and different protocols that are in place, and that allows for multiple different manufacturers to operate in the same roadway. We're not seeing the same thing in drones quite yet, and so that push towards some level of standardization, or at least industry standards, is going to be very important, just to provide overlapping networks. Otherwise, you're going to see a lot of different proprietary single networks as opposed to one big ecosystem. And so one of the biggest challenges that we're running into is just everybody doing it their own way and not doing it in a cohesive ecosystem-wide way. So we're really hoping over the next few years that some standards really start to emerge throughout the industry, and everybody's talking over the same protocols, and some form of standardization through the airframes, and different pieces like that make it easier to build an ecosystem.
Thank you, Ryan. So at this point, I would like to share with you, I mean, I've never shared this on an open platform, but we're trying to build a forum like that, especially for public health, for drones in public health, wherein we can collect these insights from the industry, that what are the standards that we can all aim for, and then collect those insights into documents which could be shared across the industry. And then probably somewhere the entire industry comes together and collaborates on these standards and then creates something really useful and scalable for everyone. And if that happens, I would really love to have you on board as one of the members of it.
Love to be on board, and I think that would be a great step forward for the.
Okay, thank you so much, Ryan. We would be happy to have you at the chat, and any comments, any questions, you can continue talking to Ryan. And I've also shared Ryan's email address and LinkedIn profile on our conference website. So everyone, please feel free to communicate with Ryan and have awesome partnerships ahead, because this is a technology that we should all be aiming for, which is holistic into 360 degrees and is doing some awesome job. And yeah, we have some couple of projects in our kitty, Ryan, so we would be happy to discuss that with you.
Fantastic, and I look forward to talking with each of you and working with you in the future. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much.
Hey there! Thank you for listening to Global Voices in Drones in Development. We will be releasing at least one new episode every week, and that would be on a Saturday. So please do tune in. And you're most welcome to join the Global Alliance on Drones in Development, where we would be having podcasts, videos, masterclasses, meetings, discussions, and much more. So see you around. Thank you for listening.